Hey all, this is Professor Luce. I posted a video yesterday, but it had issues with the audio, so I'm re-recording this from my basement. So excuse the Michigan shirt straight out of Detroit. Yeah, I'm a Lions fan, and it's been a rough year as it has been for like the past 30 years, but I'm used to it. So today we're going to talk about persuasive speaking. I do want to cover some basics. I'm going to cover the PowerPoints, some main ideas, but really expand upon those. And so make sure that you review the PowerPoints for this week's lecture as well. The first thing I need to talk about is the persuasive speech itself. And you can read the assignment sheet fully, but there's one big concept that we have to be able to understand fully, and that's a policy. Some of you will get confused by the terminology of what is not a policy, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Your persuasive speech asks for you to advocate for a change in policy. Policy simply means a rule or a law or a mandate, something like that. Whether or not you realize that you have policies that impact your life every single day. If you've ever had a job at all, you've had a policy. Why? Because you have policies that cover things like your dress code. You have policies about facial hair at work. You have policies about what you can and cannot say at work. So all of those things are things that impact you at work. Those are policies. They're just rules that you have. You have policies at school, like you can't bring a gun to the classroom. You can't bring alcohol to campus. Those are policies that we have in place. Now, on a larger scale, and what your speech should focus on is a policy that impacts either the city level or the county level or the state level or the national level. And occasionally there are some topics that are international, but most of you choose one of the former. So there's lots of ways in which policies impact you on a regular basis. If you live in an area with an HOA right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about because I'm sure the HOA has tons of policies that you absolutely hate. And that's okay, but this speech is designed to get you ready for making changes to those policies when you move either, to a new location or if you want to try to enact some change where you live now. It's a valuable real world skill to have. And a lot of people are really good at identifying problems. That's not the hard part of this speech. We all know problems. Ask anybody on Facebook, what's a problem with today's society? And you'll get about a billion responses. The hard part is finding the solution. So, with this speech assignment, where you need to start is by looking for the solution. The key part about advocating for a change in policy is that you are not to come up with your own solution. I'm going to repeat that. You are not to come up with your own solution. You need to find evidence that suggests a solution. The reason for that is that we are not policymakers, and you're not going to be able to come up with a solution that would work from a practical perspective. You're not going to think about things like where do we get the money from, or how is that money distributed, or who's going to enforce the laws, or how do we know that this doesn't conflict with other legislation that already exists. When you find research that's been done by somebody else, they've already done the hard work and looked into those types of things. So when you're looking for a solution, there's two different ways to go about it. The first way is to find another area that's already implemented your solution. So for example, if you wanted to mandate recycling in Horry County, you might look to another state or city or even country that's already has mandatory recycling in place. I just personally know that this is true. My in-laws live up in Boston, and so I know for a fact that they require recycling up there. How? Well, their state law requires them to put out recycling, and if they don't put out recycling, the trash company doesn't pick up their trash. It's a pretty simple process. You put out recycling, your trash gets picked up. You don't put out recycling, your trash does not get picked up. Other states have different things where if you don't separate your recycling from your trash, that they will fine you a certain amount. I believe that's what the Canadian system does. There's a small fine attached to it. So if you wanted mandatory recycling in Horry County, you would say we should implement the Massachusetts model or the Pennsylvania model or the Wisconsin model or whatever model you choose. Explain what that does and then explain why it works. Say, well, look, this is what the Wisconsin model does. It has these three steps. And then here's why it's worked. It's reduced the amount of recyclables and trash by 97% and blah, 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 blah. So that's one way, is to look at other comparable entities, whether it's a state government, city government, federal government, etc. And you say, you know what, it's worked really, really well over there, so let's implement it here instead. The second way is to look at proposals by legislators, and this happens way more than you think. If you watch any of the presidential debates, you know that they have tons of policy ideas in mind, and even the senatorial debates in South Carolina, they also have policy ideas that they propose. Those are available to you in research. And so, and it's not always just senators. Sometimes there's these things called think tanks. They're basically big entities, and that's what they do is they do a bunch of research and they come up with policy proposals to fix problems. So what they do is they do all the research ahead of time as a potential solution. It means it hasn't been implemented yet anywhere, but they've done the research to figure out how it would likely work and why it would be successful. So there are literally thousands of bills every year at the congressional level that never get passed. You never hear of them. As an easy example, and this was probably 20 years ago, there was a proposal to end homelessness. Have any idea how you would end homelessness? It's not difficult. It's give everybody a home. You can probably guess who proposed it. It was Bernie Sanders. Now, we obviously didn't do this. It was a proposal that was put forth before Congress and nobody ever took any action on it. But that's an example of a bill that does exist. It was written out. It was explained how it would work, explained how we would get the funding, etc. But that is a proposal that you could potentially use as a solution. And it's not just on the federal level, this happens on the state level, the city level, the county level, all the time as well. So you could also, for your solution, if you don't have a model that exists somewhere else, you could look at some of those proposals that legislators or think tanks have put out as a potential solution as well. The hardest part about your persuasive speech topic is going to be finding the solution. Your topic will not be accepted if you do not have a very clear-cut solution put in place. Make sure you include a link to your solution. It could be a news article saying, hey, this has been done in Wyoming, or it could be a link to a bill proposal that was from 10 years ago from Joe Biden or from Lindsey Graham or from any other senator or representative, whoever you want to pick, that's fine. Just give me a link to the solution so that way I know what you're going to be utilizing. That is a hard part. Finding the problem is never, ever, ever the hard part about the speech. That's easy. You can name 10 different problems in the world right now without even thinking about it. Naming 10 different solutions, that's not quite as easy. So with this persuasive speech, you need to keep that in mind. There are some topics that are going to be better than others, and there are some topics that are banned. There is a ban list topic, or a ban list of topics in the assignment sheet. Here's where these categories generally fall that are banned. The first is going to be moral topics. Moral topics are basically those things that you have deep-seated beliefs about that tie directly to your morals. So things like abortion, the death penalty, etc. Those are not allowed because you're not going to change anyone's mind in 5 to 7 minutes. It's not possible, right? You're not going to change your morals that quickly. So there's no point giving a persuasive speech for this class on any of those issues. The second would be issues that are like morals that people have deep-seated beliefs about, but maybe aren't really a moral issue. And the one that comes to mind is gun control. That's something that people aren't going to change their minds very quickly in a 5 to 7 minute speech, even though it's not really a moral issue. And the final category would be like those decades topics that we talked about where you're not really introducing anything new. So a really good example of this is lowering the drinking age from 21 to 18. That's not going to be allowed because you're not really adding anything new to the discussion. This has been around since the 70s, and what you're probably going to say is, well, if you're old enough to serve in the military, you should be old enough to drink. They do it in Europe all the time, and they're just fine, and it lowers binge drinking in college. That's the same argument that's been around for 50 years. So that topic is not something that you'd want to be introducing to the class. Other similar topics would be things like school uniforms, because those have been debated since like the 80s. So you're talking about 40 years of a topic. Another area would be legalization of marijuana. This debate has been going on since like the 60s, 70s, and the scientific evidence hasn't really changed a whole lot. It pretty much says that those claims that it's a gateway drug and that it's really harmful to your health, more than smoking or alcohol. They're just not true. Like, the scientific studies have been pretty clear about its impact. Does that mean it should be legalized? Not necessarily, but the science doesn't have the harms to it. And you're not going to be adding anything new to the debate. We know that it can be used for medicinal purposes. Several states have already done it. South Carolina has not, but that doesn't mean that we're making that decision based on scientific evidence. So you wouldn't really be adding anything new to the debate, and that's why legalization of marijuana would not be approved. There are some other topics that might be spin-offs that could be allowed. So, for example, legalizing clinical testing or clinical use of MDMA or microdosing. That's something that's been known to have an impact, especially with people that have PTSD. And that one's a little bit more controversial because it's not marijuana. Another example might be decriminalization of all drugs. All drugs. Now, realize that does not mean it makes them legal. Decriminalization simply means that you don't go to jail for it. So in that example, when I've seen topics, it hasn't been like, oh, everybody gets free access to drugs. No, it means that if you are a user of drugs and you're found in possession, that you get treatment rather than going to jail time. If you are dealing drugs, then you would still end up going to jail. So that is really prison reform, but it also falls underneath drug decriminalization. So that's an area where you took like a topic of like marijuana, which is not a great topic, and made it a much better topic. So there are definitely ways to come up with good topics here. I'm not trying to kill your creativity. I'm actually trying to force you to step outside the box and talk about topics that haven't been talked to death for the past 10, 20, 30, or 50 years even. So do keep that in mind when you look at the topics to make sure that's not one of the banned topics. In addition to that, let's talk about the persuasive PowerPoint. One thing I do want you to keep in mind is that we do talk about ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is your credibility, pathos is emotional appeal, and logos is using logic or argument structure and evidence. And you need to have a combination of all three. Now, you do build credibility by having good evidence, but the emotional part, that should be pretty apparent as to how to have some of those emotional appeals. The Sarah McLachlan commercial, the ASPCA with the music in the background, and you see all the dogs and the cats. That is a very strong emotional appeal. I've included a variety of videos for you to watch. The Dale Peterson for Agriculture, Secretary of Agriculture, I think it's in Alabama, and he has a lot of emotional appeals, but also appeals to credibility. I'm not saying they're effective. So you need to watch the videos to see what is effective and what is not. And I try to pick some of the more humorous examples, but that is a good example of those types of appeals, and you can be the judge as to whether or not they're effective. There's also some use of fallacies. DirecTV had a series of commercials a little while ago about that use fallacious arguments, and you'll see one, it's like the slippery slope fallacy, and then you'll also see some other arguments too in video form. So at the end of that, I also included an A sample and an F sample of a persuasive speech. It's the same speaker, same topic, but you can see substantial differences between the two. And one of them, when it comes to fake pills, it is very, very clear about what that solution should look like versus, a generic solution that doesn't give you a whole lot of information. In addition to that, pay attention to the use of visual aids. You'll see a dramatic difference in the quality between the two. For this persuasive speech, I am asking you, if possible, to utilize a visual aid in your recording. If you have issues with it, let me know ahead of time. But for most of you, you should be able to record and show a visual aid of some sort at the same time. And if you can't, let me know, and then we will find a solution to that issue. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry about the audio issues yesterday. If you do have additional questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Thank you.